Alrighty. Hello and welcome everyone to Australians Abroad, how the Australian Consulate can help. Thank you very much for joining this evening. I know it's been a stressful few weeks for everyone, and thank you especially to Alastair Walton, the Consul-General of Australia to New York, who I will introduce properly in a minute. But thank you for taking your time out to help us get a bit of a handle on everything. I've set up tonight so that we can try and answer as many questions as we can. Now, I know some of you are in terribly worrying situations, which are stressful and really impact your whole life. So we're going to do our best to get you the answers that you're looking for. That being said, it is confusing for us too. And the biggest issue that we've got right now is that the goalposts keep moving, the answers keep changing, and this makes it especially difficult to give you good advice. But we're going to do our best. So here's how it's going to work. I've taken the 150 questions that were submitted and we've processed them into something that's as accessible as possible for as many of you as possible. I'm going to ask Alastair the questions and we'll go back and forth to really extract the answers that we can. We'll start very broadly and then we're going to zoom in to some scenarios that should cover a lot of you. Before we get to any information though, we do need to flag that this webinar is strictly for informational purposes only, and it is not intended, nor should it be relied upon as a source of legal advice or opinion. It's important that you know that because everyone's situation is different. We're all coming from different backgrounds, and not everything that we say tonight will directly apply to you. Just before I do introduce Alastair properly, I want to cover a few of the questions that we did get that we won't be going into depth about tonight. Alastair is not an immigration attorney, and his role is centred around Australians in this region of the United States. We therefore won't be covering US immigration policy and too much about specific cases of visa applications, US consulates reopening, or what's happening with green card applications, because that's not our focus for tonight. I did cover some of these topics in a webinar a couple of weeks ago with an immigration attorney, and we've also got some great links and resources from other Australian American groups and immigration attorneys that should help you out that we can share at the end of the webinar. But for the most up-to-date information, and because we had quite a number of questions come in, Alastair will be interviewing Chantel Markel from Commissa Markel this Thursday at 5:30 p.m. to cover a lot of those topics and a lot of the questions that you have submitted. So there'll be a link to that on the Consulate's Facebook page tomorrow that you can tune in as well as tonight. So to introduce Alastair. Alastair has been the Consul-General of Australia to New York since August 2017. He's a career investment banker who was the former co-chairman and managing director of Goldman Sachs Australia. Prior to his role here in New York, Alastair was the inaugural Consul General and Senior Trade Commissioner in Houston, Texas. So thank you again, Alastair, for joining us. Hello.
Thanks, Josh, and welcome everybody. First of all, this is a great initiative. I think we're all feeling a sense of isolation. The self-isolation affected the entire community. I know that, for example, we're doing virtual drinks with various folks right across the states, and it's a way of connecting with people. But you know, all of our world's been turned upside down by the virus, by the constant changes, as you mentioned. We get a lot of information coming out of governors, the White House, etc., but also Canberra, and so we're constantly updating our Facebook page, our website page, etc. And it is you know, it's a pretty disconcerting time for everyone, particularly, you know, there's some really members of the community that are very, very tough out there.
For sure.
So this is a great initiative to actually reach out. I think we all need more of this.
We do. So how are you? Like, tell me first off, you know, personally, on a personal note, how's life changed for you in the last couple of weeks and months?
Well, it's certainly changed in terms of what we're doing work-wise, which we'll get into later on. You know, in order to be a consul general, you have to be fairly outgoing and gregarious and enjoy meeting people. And so this self-isolation is difficult psychologically. But on the other hand, I think that the work that we're doing to help people, you know, we have a meeting every day with our staff, right in the front line. It's been very rewarding helping Australians, getting Australians back, giving them advice. And so while the focus has sort of narrowed in some respects, it's sort of broad in other respects in terms of this assistance and where you can really make a difference. On a personal note, you know, I wasn't well a few weeks ago. I think some of our staff weren't well a few weeks ago. We're all in good shape.
Glad.
So we may be early adapters, we don't know. But the good news is we're open for business and happy to help.
I mean, you're sitting there in a suit and tie, and I will admit I put this shirt on just for the occasion. So you're doing better than a lot of people out there, I'm sure.
Well, Josh, I think if I didn't wear a shirt, I'm not sure that would be such a good look for people.
That's a very different kind of
You're
Zoom.
a bit younger than I am, but I have to wear a suit and tie to cover my eye.
Oh, love it. So I want to start really, really sort of general, because I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand what the consulate does on a day-to-day basis. So during normal times, what would we use the consulate for? What are you doing on a day-to-day basis?
Well, obviously, we have always had our passport and consular services, and that's what I call our retail offering. People come to the consulate. I constantly look at the Yelp reviews. I'm checking with the staff. We have meetings on particular consular cases. Often these are Australians in distress, but often it's just about making sure that people get their passports on time, etc. But on top of that, we also have a number of activities. We have 10 states in our jurisdiction, as far as north as Maine, west.
So that's the northeast region.
Northeast, but we also, interestingly enough, and I think it's because of flights, I cover Puerto Rico and US Virgin Islands. And so, for example, there's been a couple of cases recently that we've had with yachts that have been able to get into the States, and we've been helping with as well. So we do that, but we also, in our normal course, we have outreach to the US military with a big Anzac Day planned, which we're unable to go ahead with. We have things like the Screen Forum. We have a big, vibrant arts group in New York. So with culture, we have a business and investment group, and we have a team that actually looks now at congressional, looking at US policy, etc. So that area of our work has been reorientated towards effectively consular and passport matters.
Yeah, awesome. So you do have relations with, the US government is sort of, you're adjacent over here. So you're constantly talking to them about, you and the ambassador to Australia are sort of in communication where it's needed.
Yes, in fact, I've known the ambassador for about 20 years, and in fact, my son worked for him for 3 years. So we're pretty close. It actually helps a lot enormously. But twice a week, the ambassador has a call with all the consul-generals in the US. We go through all the issues. We haven't had to deal with it in New York, but we've had quite a bit of work to do with cruise ships in Florida and in Hawaii and the West Coast in San Francisco, and that was an enormous effort. So we sort of coordinate that. But on a normal level, when it comes to the federal government, that's definitely in the purview of the embassy and the ambassador. But look, we have very strong relationships with the state governments and also the US State Department. So it's the US State Department, called the Office of Foreign Missions, that actually gave us the exemption to enable us to work. So while there's a lot going on, we are deemed an essential service. So that's an important relationship that's allowed us to keep open during pause. And even it's, I didn't know this until I took the job. We even have embedded Australian Federal Police here that talk to the New York Police and various things to look at the security. So we sort of get that background as well.
It's a big picture.
It's a big picture, very holistic. So, one of the things we're looking at is, okay, is New York safe? What's happened with the virus? Are there areas that are unsafe? And interestingly enough, the statistics are that New York's had the last level of crime, this level was in 1918, which ironically was the Spanish flu pandemic. I'm not sure there's a relationship or not, but certainly crime's down, etc. So again, we look right across that whole holistic way of looking at looking after Australians here.
Yeah, okay. So on that, when something like what's going on right now in the world happens, what work is done to guarantee that keeps going? So you mentioned that you've got the special exemption to stay at the office, but I imagine you've got policies internally, this is planned for in some way, shape or form.
It is planned for, but we have general crisis action plans, okay?
Yep.
I think there was a great expression that a war plan never survives the first engagement with the enemy. And so these have to be modified, and they have been quite extensively for COVID-19. So, you know, we look at our overall plan and we say, okay, how do we need to adapt that? So what you know, our key role is to maintain continuity of the Australian community here and also American interlocutors. And a small thing, but for example, I now go and pick up our consular staff in the mornings in the car and drop them off, so that they don't have to be exposed. Well, there's no public transport or even Ubers, so we take it seriously.
They have to be at the office. They have to be with you, and that's.
So I've got the car. I drive them and pick them up, and I think they're quite enjoying that. I should have some mints and some water and get an Uber. But it's important to show that you know, our staff welfare is incredibly important to us, because without our staff, we can't service the community. So we focus on staff. So for example, we have our staff into different shifts, 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. And if anybody shows any sort of illness, we sort of park them off. And we have a couple of staff that we would put at a high risk, so they are doing remotely by home. But when questions come in to the consulate, and we are really focused on answering questions in a very short time frame, we've got our staff who are there to pick up the calls and answer them. So I think we've got a pretty
fantastic
apparatus, actually.
Yep, fantastic. So that sort of covers where you are right now and what you're doing. So I guess sort of to jump right in the deep end, based on what the Australian government and what the US government, and sort of mixing in a bit of your personal advice from what you've seen in your position, what is your recommendation for who should stay, who should go? Are there particular considerations that you think people should be looking for?
Yeah, rather than say who should stay, what I want to do is look at a sort of a risk assessment that people should make.
Sure, yep.
And so first of all, I want to acknowledge that this is a very difficult time to make decisions. Lack of information, changing information. One minute you got a job, the next thing you may not have a job. You've got children at home, so there are the normal sort of decisions that we make. We would normally say to make a decision about, do I leave New York, within 3 months is a very short period of time in normal circumstances.
Yes.
Most people look at 1 or 2 years, what I'm going to do down the track. Every time I speak to Australians, I say, well, I might stay here, I'm going to do this. Now we're asking people to make very compressed decisions, and we sort of recognise that is an incredibly stressful thing to do. So first of all, that's why we've had so much focus on updating the travel advisories to keep them absolutely current. And they have changed a lot. As you know, for example, Australia now requires a 14-day quarantine. That was not the case a few weeks ago. Look, one of the key things I think you have to look at here, that I would look at, is health insurance. It's a unique American issue. If you are here and you have lost your job, and you may have a grace period of your health insurance, maybe 2 months or 3 months, whatever, that's certainly a factor you have to look at that's unique to this country. Yep. So when I look at the risk assessment, I look at health insurance being number one and number two. And people are naturally focused on COVID-19, but not all cases are COVID-19. So you have to think about, well, what if something else happens to me as well? The official advice is, you know, I mean, obviously a lot of Australians who actually live in the States, the dual nationals, etc., that have to make decisions that are quite different. But what I would say is, anybody that's here for the short term, that worries about their insurance or anything like that, or worries about money, running out of money, etc., or who had a job and lost their job, really should take the government's advice about heading home to Australia, in my view. Now, that is not an absolute blanket like...
Sure, yes.
For example, I'm not leaving. I have a job to do. But so I think you have to calibrate the risk assessment and look at all these factors and then sort of make a decision. And can I also say, be decisive. We have a number of people ring up and say, should this, should it, and every 2 weeks. And the answer... Planning out, Planning out, and you sort of you've got to lay all these things out and say, okay, what is the risk of staying? What is the risk of going? And if the risk of staying in, particularly with health insurance, is an overriding factor, then I think your answer's there for you.
Should be the top of the list. Yeah, and I think that, as you said, that applies to, if you're a dual national or if you've got a solid, you've still got your job and you're on a visa and you consider yourself, you live here for the period of your visa and you are established. It's completely reasonable, I think, from sort of what you were said, to say, I'm going to stay because I've got everything I need.
Yeah, I've got bank accounts, I've got funds, I've got an apartment, I've got, I've had a long-term job. That's a very different thing to, like, I was in a J1, I've lost my job. I was in E3, I've lost my job. My insurance is going to run in 2 months. I'm worried about flights. So, as you look at that, you've got to sort of come to the decision that's based on the risk for yourself. But I would say err on the side of caution. Go to Australia. There are flights now. I think that will be the case.
We don't know the situation.
We do not know the situation. And remember, it's a two-way street. It may be the United States that imposes travel restrictions. We've certainly seen domestically. So you've got to, err on the side of caution is the way to go.
Yeah, and I think your point about health insurance is an important one, because it's not, as you said, it's not only COVID-19 insurance that you need to worry about. If you don't have insurance to cover you for everything that happened to you, every other day of the year, that's also a consideration that you need to take into account. So even if insurance isn't needed for COVID-19 cases, it is important to have that insurance for everything else that goes on in life.
Yeah, and Josh, one of the unhappy jobs that we have is there are a number of Australians we've dealt with in my 5 years as diplomat that haven't had it, that have had accidents and have had massive medical bills with all sorts of repercussions. So I'm not saying this just about COVID-19. I'm saying in general, but the situation now, you really have to focus your mind.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to split into sort of two groups. So let's say I do decide to stay and I feel like I've got my insurance, I've got whether I've got a job or not, but I've got everything I need and I'm comfortable. What does the consulate want Australians to know about our rights and our responsibilities, and what are the ways that we should be keeping informed and aware from? You've mentioned a few of yours, but what do you think they should be doing?
I think keeping yourself informed. I mean, what we do every day is we look at what the mayor's saying, what the White House is saying, what the governors are saying. Now, in some cases, they're not necessarily aligned.
Yes.
We know in some of the news channels, if you go from Fox to CNN, you get a very different story. So in some respects, you've got to sort of weigh this all up.
Yep.
I hope that we are seen to be the source of impartial advice. That's conservative in nature, that looks after people's welfare. I mean, you can't underestimate how much time we are thinking about this, and when we put out information, including webinars like this, about trying to keep people informed. So the first thing to do is to keep yourself current on the information. That allows you also then to do a risk assessment. For example, New York is supposed to be flattening out. What happens if it wasn't? So what do I do then? I think the other thing is we are doing all this. We're open 5 days a week. Now, in many places around the world, because of illness and because of travel restrictions, some of our embassies can't do what we're doing. And I've made it a particular point of this consulate to, as long as we can, to remain open 5 days a week. So we've got staff to be able
actually in the office and
in the office. We've got other staff at home ready to answer questions. So I hope that your viewers have had a good response. But we're here in a very fast turnaround to questions. But keep yourself really involved in the local. If you decide to stay.
Yeah. And you think it's your Facebook page, the consulate's Facebook page in New York, and the consulate's website are both places that you can kind of, you can assume that you've taken the information of the day from as many sources as you can. You've distilled it down into something that is, here's a nugget that you need to consider for your ongoing consideration for someone that's living here.
Yeah. I also think it's important to note that every day we do what's called a sit rep, which goes back to Canberra. Now, there's a national sit rep that's done in DC, but because New York is the epicenter, frankly, globally of the virus at the moment, the New York sit reps have an important role to play.
Absolutely, yep.
And you will have seen, for example, that until recently, Qantas and Virgin, we'll get into that in the next questions, but had pulled out. Now there are assisted flights. They're very, very cheap. that's in a response to information and coming back from questions that people have asked us.
Okay, yep.
Concerns raised. So it's not just, it's important for people who are staying here to note that we're not just saying go and look at the local news. We're reporting that back to Canberra with recommendations. And that's partially
and that
why
feeds into the
system, which is why things are being updated. And obviously, Australia's looking at its own situation as well in terms of quarantine, etc. And I think the numbers in Australia are actually very, very good as a result of that. But keep yourself involved and don't be a stranger.
Yeah. Okay. So that SITREP or situation report, like that really informed, it's a cycle. It goes back and forth to make sure that everyone's on the same page.
It makes sure that Australia, you know, we're watching the White House, et cetera, on an hourly basis. Every day we synthesize it, we send it back. It's a snapshot.
Awesome. Yep.
Then helps inform Australia. And I believe those additional flights are a response to what has been seen and the demand for people wanting to go back.
Okay. So if I have decided to stay, in terms of financial help, if I've lost work over here, so I've been living here, I've had a job and I'm stuck here, is there any financial help from Australia available if we can't get home or, you know, we need some support?
Well, look, I think if you have lost your job, and I know that a lot of people lost their jobs, and equally as importantly, a lot of Australian businesses have had to lay off a lot of people. They may not be Australians, but they've been here for 10 years, they built a life here, and all of a sudden this has been turned upside down. It's in the hospitality industry, which is actually why I'm going out, interviewing people, partially to also say, we care. You know, while you were doing well, we cared, but now that you're doing up, we even care even more. But if you're in a situation here without a job, which probably means you haven't got insurance, then you really have to get back. Okay, part of that risk assessment. So there are things we can do, but also there's things that people have to take responsibility for themselves. And so you speak to your family, you get back. These flights back to Australia are very cheap.
Yeah, that's a good point. You should look into actually how much it costs, because it has come down, as I understand, from a normal flight to...
It's several $100s.
Yes, okay.
Now, if you're in the States and you only have a few $100s, you shouldn't be here anyway. And we can then talk to you about how to get back. We do expect...
Okay, so that's something that they can discuss. If it absolutely comes to that position, then...
We would firstly expect people to talk to their families, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah,
but,
sure.
You know, if you're here without a job and no income and no money, et cetera...
It's time to have a look.
It's time to get on that plane. You know, and that's why it's all... And again, there'll be time. And the other thing is, when it comes to overstays and visas, et cetera, it's not particular area, but again, just be cautious. So if you're here without a job, without insurance, et cetera, I think you know the answer.
Okay. Yep. I can say also, just as an addendum, because I know a few people did send in the question about the US stimulus package, and there is a bit of information that if you did, as I understand it right now from the legislation that was passed, if you filed a 2018 or 2019 residential tax return in the US, you are eligible as a visa holder, green card holder, to receive that stimulus if you tick the requirements that everyone does. So that is something worth looking into. I know there's been some information going around about whether, do we, don't we? But the legislation as it stands at the moment, as I understand, does say that we as Australians who have filed tax, who are tax-paying residents, are eligible for that stimulus.
Yeah, because the question then, Josh, is, when will that check arrive? Can you get through that?
So it's not to rely on it. Yeah.
In other words, again, I would say as a matter of common sense, if the difference between staying and going is a check, probably answer the question.
Look at going. Yeah, okay.
If it's like, look, I can get to the next several months and that check will come in handy and I have filed my tax and et cetera.
Yeah,
that's a difference. So again, I want to tell people, do what we do. Everything we do is put in effectively a risk assessment about our operations, et cetera. And sometimes you have to change them.
Yep. So if things do get worse in New York, for example, so the people that are currently residing in New York City, things are not good outside, and we do see that on the news every day.
Yeah.
If things do get dramatically worse, is there a different way that we should be looking at the Australian consulate, or is it the same advice? Just keep an eye on the Facebook page, keep an eye on the website, and call in if we need help.
Yeah, talk to us, because if things get dramatically worse, first of all, you have to recognise that will go back. That's already gone back to Australia to SIP rep. We're not sitting here and going, oh my God, we've had a call from an Australian. It's getting worse.
Yep.
Right? We are on this the whole time,
Yep.
which is absolutely critical. And so we'll be getting that information back. As I said, early information results in extra flights, etc. So tell us your particular issues. We have seen everything. Unfortunately, as part of this job.
Yeah.
We have not seen an Australian passing as a result of COVID-19, but it's not a regular for us to have to deal with these as well.
Yep.
So as I said, you sort of see everything in this job, but keep in touch, and then we'll pass the information back. I think for many people too, and I've seen this from the staff, people just want someone to talk to. Maybe a clear accent. A lot of it's to do with you're still here. Part of today is to say we're here, very much working as hard as we can. But if things get dramatically worse, we'll be. I would, in fact, just before this call, I was on a call with all the consulates and embassies in the Americas, with a doctor in Australia, with the departmental secretary. Again, an exchange.
Just keeping that information going back and forth.
Correct. And everybody sort of recognised that New York is the epicenter now of what's happening in the world. And in fact,
a good litmus test for what's about to happen in a lot of places, basically.
And in some cases, I'm not sure about you, but I think the reporting about New York back in Australia is almost worse than it is here.
I've never had, I've had people who I haven't spoken to in years reaching out to me in the last couple of days to say they hope I'm okay, which is very lovely. But it sort of makes it even more dramatic being here.
Yeah, and so as people reach out to us all over the world saying, okay, we want to reach out to the community and say, are you okay? And if you're not okay, come and tell us. All right.
Say something.
If I can just say, if you're not okay, call.
Okay.
We'll deal with it. Thank you.
If I find myself without ID, because I know a few people are worried about showing ID when they go to hospital, or do I have any options to get a travel document or ID from the consulate if I need it urgently? And
you do. So the important point is that we can issue an emergency passport with a duration of up to 1 year in less than 2 days.
Okay.
All right, 2 days or less. And we've had other people saying, "Oh, look, what do I do? My passport's about to expire. What do I?" And say, "Look, come in." Now, the other thing about these emergency passports is, and limited duration passports, is we can even do the interview by Skype.
Wow.
All right.
Okay.
So for an emergency passport, we can get you one in 2 days, and we can do the interview over Skype.
And is that something that gets delivered to my home, or do you know, or is it delivered? We go to the consulate.
No, we can deliver it.
Okay, fantastic.
Look, I've got a car. I can drive around.
On your round when you're picking everyone up in the morning, you can drop a few passports off.
Yeah, correct. But it's important to note that there are those options. We're also obviously our focus is on emergencies right now.
Yep.
But absolutely, we can get you a passport in 2 days or less.
Okay. If on that, and I think this is probably as far as we stray into the US immigration bit, but just to sort of give people some guidance, if my visa is expiring and I might not be able to get home in July, are there considerations, or is it again something just case by case and have a chat to you?
Have a chat to us. This is one of these sort of crystal ball questions people ask us. What's coming in July? So here's what I would say. That the news in places like the UK, Italy, Spain, the US has been getting worse, not better. Now, I think we're over the curve in places like Italy and in Spain. And even there was discussion today, I'm sure you saw the news, that the expected jump that they had in New York has been levelling off. So social distancing has worked. Great news. but you're asking people a crystal ball and to say, you know, if I go back, what will happen to my visa, etc. Again, I would be saying it depends on your circumstance, but err on the side of caution. So the question is, what are you doing in April, May, and June that is so fundamentally important to your life that you don't go back?
Yeah,
that's right.
No,
So
it's a good, yeah.
Yeah. So if I'm about to win an Oscar nomination, I might stay. But if I'm just hanging around New York just for the sake of it, right? The answer is probably that's not a sensible thing to do. So I think it's really important that you know, we can't crystal gaze for people. And one of the reasons we can't do that is we don't know what the US will do.
Yeah,
So,
all the communication in the world still doesn't know exactly what the path is.
Exactly. So if it's a 3-month question that you're going to go back in July anyway, you really want to answer what am I going to be doing for the next 3 months? That is really important. You know, you can always come back.
Yep. Okay. And I think that's you know, another good mention of your interview with Chantal on Thursday will be another one where you can hear sort of similar advice. I'm sure, having seen Chantal speak a little bit in the last couple of weeks, she's got very similar advice, but I think it's very much worthwhile watching that because there'll be some more in-depth case-by-case analysis of that kind of information. Yeah. So if I, that's sort of the, if I stay, if I do decide to go, and I've realised that I've got to sort my things out and get going. I know you've sort of already touched on this, but I just want to make sure everyone knows passport renewals. Can I still get a new passport? And is that the same for the consulates around the US at the moment?
Yes, it is. Some of the consulates have had to deal with some pretty difficult situations with, particularly, as I said, these cruise ships. So hundreds of Australians, right? Now, actually, interestingly enough, New York is a big cruise ship port. And I was expecting that we might have 1 or 2 cases ourselves. We haven't had that. And again, that's a good example where, you know, open for business, a cruise ship comes on with 300 Australians and suddenly everything's thrown into turmoil. So we haven't had that, but in places like San Francisco, particularly, and in Hawaii, they have.
Yeah.
Look, what I would say in passports is we are issuing full validity passports.
Yep.
You do have to come for an interview with those. You know, we can't do those over Skype.
Okay.
You have to have the information, and they'll, you know, they take several weeks. So again,
so it's something to plan in advance. It's really, you know, set your path, do your analysis now. Say I need to leave by X date. I'm going to be on that flight, and I need my passport in time.
So logically, if you're talking about I may be going home at Christmas, right? You've got plenty of time. If you're doing the sort of assessment that we're talking about now, then, you know, frankly, the emergency passport is a very easy way of doing it. It's valid for a year. It'll get you out of the country, etc. All right. So I think that's very, very important. And there's certain restrictions on difference of flights, etc. But that's the emergency passport is definitely would be preference. That's what we're focusing on.
That's fantastic.
So if we've got 3 or 4 people, and I should also say that for people who are listening in, we've had a number of Australians, in fact, more than a number, who simply do not turn up for their passport interviews. And I would say this, you know, our staff are put themselves in harm's way. They're coming in every day to make sure they can service the community. A little bit of maybe a little bit of mutual respect
back and forth. Get in touch, contact, and let them know.
If you're not going to come in, if you don't need your passport, please tell us, because we're trying to work out who should come in. We're working on key consular cases. So a little bit of TLC back, I think, would be greatly appreciated by the staff.
No, okay, good advice. If I do need to get a full passport, do you know where, and it was funny, this has come up a little bit, but getting an Australian-sized passport photo taken at the moment, do you know of any places that it's possible to do that?
Well, the answer is it was never easy.
The never-ending question for Australians getting that one right.
We had about a 90% reject rate.
Wow.
Because people would go down to the local chemist who had not been trained. And we ended up doing many of our passport photographs ourselves, which we actually can't do at the moment. But there are ways that you can actually do it yourself. and you can actually read the guidelines. And and what you do is you can actually send in the photographs to us and we'll print them for you.
Okay.
So and then we can say, no, you'll need to do this again.
Yep.
I'm going to read this. It's www.passportphotonow.com. So that's www.passportphotonow.com. Actually helps you specify what you need. And look, it's a little bit frustrating from time to time, maybe that you haven't got the photograph quite right, but we'll work through that with you until it is right, but we'll print it out here and get that done for you.
Okay, fantastic. Well, that's the easiest way, absolutely.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So, okay, in terms of, you mentioned them before, the cheaper flights. So I just wanted to clarify, what's the latest travel advice regarding flights and travel, and how do these repatriation flights, can I get one? Yeah, what's the situation with those flights?
Well, first of all, they're not repatriation flights. It's important to note. So it's important. Virgin and Qantas are now flying. They're doing weekly flights between LA and Brisbane. And the reason they're going to Brisbane is because Sydney's, there's so many flights coming that the hotels are booked up.
Gotcha.
That's only for another few weeks. United has always been flying to Australia every single day, and a shout out to United. So there's always been those flights. It's important to note also that Qantas and Virgin flights are one-way flights. United, they're two-way flights.
Okay.
And you can get into who qualifies to come back. Air New Zealand's flying. We're sending someone back to Australia via Doha for reasons I can't go into. So there are flight options that people can look at. But I would say avail yourself of those flights that have been put in and I think it's about $400 a one-way ticket. So it's very, very cheap. But again, we have all that on our website that people can look at in our Facebook page.
Fantastic.
The minute that came on, we had that information straight up there.
Okay. And yeah, I'll share those addresses of your website and your Facebook and things at the conclusion of this. So we'll make sure that everyone's got the right information. But I think that's really important because we did have a few questions about, what will the situation look like in the future and through July and December. And I mean, as you've said before, we don't know. So if your plan is, especially if it's July, that's not that far away, it would be worth, take that flight option now, really start to look down that path right now. Yeah.
I mean, particularly look at the next 3 months, there's probably, hopefully, a bit more coming to be more to do in June. But at the moment, the experience you're going to have in New York is a very different one to anything you're ever going to experience the rest of your life again. So again, if it's December, it's quite different. But if you're talking about July, you should be going sooner rather than later.
Okay. So if I'm traveling with someone, so say I've got a non-Australian spouse, can they come back to Australia with me without a visa?
No.
Okay.
So, but it's not that. It's a no, but then it's a yes.
Yeah. No, but it's the legal answer.
Yeah. Pose the question, Josh. Okay?
Yeah.
So what you have to do is you have to apply for a visa first. Okay. That could be an ETA, etc. Then you apply to the Department of Home Affairs with an exemption. Okay. And that's done electronically. So a spouse, naturally, a de facto partner, and a dependent child, right? So so you apply for the ETA, which normally only
is the ESTA equivalent. It's the quick, travel back and forth one,
right? It's only a few hours normally to get an answer back. Then you apply for the exemption through Home Affairs, and what you need to do, there's a specific form, but you can explain the fact that I'm a de facto with someone, I'm living in the same apartment, etc., etc. And having done that, then absolutely you can. So it's actually not as, the official answer is no until you've qualified to be yes, but the yes is actually fairly straightforward. Now, not every country will qualify, but certainly, if you're from the US, etc., that should be, I shouldn't say straightforward, but there is a process there to do that. And we have seen, that's been a very common question, by the way.
I'm sure, a lot of families that are looking to, not just leave themselves.
Now,
so
if you're saying, look, it's my girlfriend or my boyfriend, and I met 3 weeks ago, I want to come to Australia again, that's not going to fly. There's got to be a proper
Sure.
relationship that's appropriately documented to satisfy home affairs. But
Okay.
you know, it's sort of joint bank accounts, living in the same apartment, etc.
Yep. Okay. So, and that sort of is the most effective way, whether you've got a partner, you said a wife or husband or partner, spouse, de facto, and its dependent child. That's all sort of included in that.
Correct. And we define a de facto as 12 months in a relationship, living in the same place. It's not like you have to file a stat dec or something. It's like evidence that you're in a relationship.
Okay, that's good to know. If I do get back to Australia and that's been my decision, how long does it take for Medicare? So I know a few people have asked about, they obviously we're talking about health insurance earlier and making sure that they might not have coverage here, so they head back to Australia. But if you've been here for some years, you may understand that you're no longer covered by Medicare. And what's the process involved with getting back onto coverage?
Well, first of all, you have to apply to Services Australia, which is so you have to apply to there. So we are not an agent of Medicare, etc. Right? We help people with passports and consular cases. If you've got a valid Medicare card, very straightforward. Issued for 5 years, you go home, no problem at all.
Okay. So if your Medicare card is valid, that should be you're just back in. Yep.
Back in. Now, if you've been away for 5 years, you have to re-enroll. And so what you need to do is you need to show that you're actually moving back to Australia, to show your connection there, etc. To sort of go in and have no connection, get some treatment and fly back again. That's not really what it's designed for. So a lot of the question will be, now let's just again look at a risk assessment. If the United States, you've got proper health insurance here, you're covered, etc., you wouldn't go and do that.
Yes.
So effectively, if you are going to go back, you're going to go back. But effectively, we're looking for people who are relocating to Australia as opposed to somebody who's effectively
stopgapping.
Doing medical arbitrage, if you like, if you put it like that perspective. But absolutely. Now, if you're going back just for a few weeks, rather than some people might say, look, I want to go and see my parents for a few weeks, etc. That is not really a Medicare enrollment type thing. You've got to get travel insurance, etc. So if you're going to go back and live in Australia and re-domicile, etc., then you can apply for Medicare. It's pretty straightforward. But in effect, if you're coming back for a few weeks, that's not the way to go.
Yep. Okay. And I know this one, we did have a few people ask this, and I know it's a little bit of a crystal ball question again, but if people do go back to Australia, do we have any idea about, the Australian ban on departures, about where that's headed, or what's the current government position on where that's at?
So you need to show that you reside in the United States.
Okay.
That does not mean a permanent resident. It means you reside here. So, for example, I've got an apartment. Here's my lease. I've got my bank accounts here. I've got a business.
My utility bills and my
utility bills. So basically saying, we have lots of dual nationals, right? And obviously the green card, but basically what you need to demonstrate is that you are a resident. You reside in the United States.
Yes.
And that you're not just coming here for a few weeks to see what it's like to be, in the COVID and going home. So you're not a tourist.
Yeah.
So that's actually, again, I think a very flexible attitude that's sort of common sense as well. If you live here, you can come home, you can see people, you can see your parents, and then you can come back because you actually live here. Okay.
Yep. So there are options. The ban is not necessarily it is not for people who actually have a life. They live abroad. That's not who's meant to be included. It's meant to be stopping the travel and the holidays and people making quick trips.
Correct. So, and I think if you look at everything we're doing, it's around flexibility. I mean, there's been remarkable flexibility being shown here. Maybe not with the next topic, but in certain areas, particularly we're just looking at common sense. If you live in the United States and you come home, you want to see your parents, etc. Obviously, you've got to go through quarantine for 2 weeks.
Yep. And that's for everyone. It's a quarantine. It's a blanket.
That's for everyone. That's for blanket for everyone. But you can do that and then come back. Absolutely.
Okay. Yep. Is there, and I know there's been some confusion about this, can Australian citizens always go back to Australia? Like, is there the potential, people are making this risk benefit analysis and sort of having a look at it and worried about, if I don't go back now, in 12 months, will they say nobody's allowed in the country? Is that something that Australians have to be worried about?
No. I think if we're not travelling in 12 months, we're going to have very...
Sure, sorry, bad example, but
no,
do we
no,
think...
I mean,
yeah,
no,
yeah.
What I'm saying is you sort of, and then you bring that forward.
Sure. Yeah.
So there are no, I've seen nothing at all to suggest that Australians can't go back, right?
Yeah. Okay.
3 weeks ago, I hadn't seen the fact you need to be in quarantine for 2 weeks, right?
Yes. Yeah.
All I'm saying is it's a very fluid situation, but no country around the world has said that its citizens can't come back.
Okay. Yeah.
So I think, I would say as a betting person, they're pretty good odds that that's not going to happen. And I think the whole point about the Prime Minister's call some time ago was to say, come on back, we'll look after you, Australians first. I think it was fantastic. The call that the Prime Minister made was really around pastoral care of Australians, saying, look, you've been overseas for 10 years, you're welcome back.
Yep.
We want to look after you, etc. Your fathers and sons of our country. So I think it's fantastic. I can't see that changing. Now, the only thing I can see changing, for example, is let's say there was a ban on domestic flights in the US. We've seen very severe constraints there. So what happens there? Will some of the airlines say that we can't make any money? They're going to pull out. Okay. So it's things like that.
So it's more the logistics of actually doing it as opposed to the country itself saying we're no longer allowing people in.
Correct. You got to, and look, we can't crystal ball that far ahead.
Yeah. No, sure.
But I would say that I would be very, very surprised if we said Australians can't come home.
Yeah, and I think it's important to highlight that applies to Australians returning to Australia. Every different country has its own rights to restrict entry to whomever they want. Yep. So it is important to know that if you shouldn't be traveling for holidays at the moment anyway, but there is a chance that other countries won't let you transit through them. And as you said, it may become a logistical issue that flights can't actually make it. So again, it's making that reasonable assumption that if you can get back now, you should be, and you want to move in the next few months, then it's good, high time to pack your bags. But if you're happy and settled for 12 months, then it's fair to say that you can leave it as is and reassess down the track.
Yeah, and I think the community really bifurcates into three groups. You've got the people who've been a long time, family, school, etc. You've got people who've invested in business here for 10 years who will stay. They may not have children yet, etc. And then you've got people on, that have been here maybe on an E3 for a year. Things haven't worked out, etc., etc. And they're wondering what to do. And I think, in each case, they're very, very different decisions. But I think there's fairly obvious outcomes of those.
Yeah, and it's there on the side of caution is your advice from the very top, and I think that's good advice. Yeah. We talked about family members, and it's a sensitive issue for a lot of people, significant others and children, but also pets. That is one thing that we did get quite a few questions asking about how to transit pets back to Australia, because people may have made done that analysis and said, I need to go home, but how do I get my pet back? There's limited capacity on flights. Do you know anything about getting pets back in cargo or on flights?
Yeah, look, it's not good news, okay? So, and I know we've had a lot of questions about this, and people are very distraught. Many of the pets have been around for many, many years. They're part of the
family members, yeah.
But first of all, every time you fly into Australia, you'll see those things saying Australia's got very severe biosecurity laws.
Yes.
They're there for a reason. They're there to protect our rural communities. They're there to protect our productivity. So we've always had this very strict rule on quarantine with pets.
Yeah.
Now, at the moment, the pets have to go through Melbourne. Okay. Now, there's no passenger flights to Melbourne, so you can't travel with your pet.
You can't get there. Yeah.
Can't get there, and they're very, very. And the other thing is, if you haven't been planning for this many, many months ago, you've got to remember it's about a 6-month process to get back to Australian quarantine. So if you haven't planned for it at least 4 or 5 months ago, then you've got to recognise you're at a 6-month process.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there's no short-circuiting that process. the facilities are fairly limited at the moment. It's difficult to achieve. And so I have to say that, you know, while you've seen this very flexible approach being taken on biosecurity, we simply can't do that. So it's not good. It's not good for pets.
Okay.
It's very problematic.
Yep, for sure. On one other thing that just came up, the quarantining, and I don't know if, I guess it's just what's the official position at the moment for the compulsory quarantine. Do you know offhand what, like how long they've forecast that to be the case when you go back to Australia?
No, I don't. The quarantining issue is handled by the states. And
okay.
It came up in this call today because being effectively interlocutors with the community, even though they're run by the states, all of us and consulates and missions around the world are getting questions about,
yes,
you know, can I get exemption for children, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes, yeah.
And we have to say it depends on the individual state.
Okay.
What I would say is that I suspect that we will get better information on that in the next couple of weeks, because that is certainly, remote talk about these SIP reps, that is certainly
coming up a lot. Yep.
Coming up a lot, particularly young families.
Yep.
But it's done by individual states.
Understood.
Now you'll notice that I mentioned that the Virgin and Qantas flights are now going to Brisbane. That's because there's been so much pressure on Sydney, etc. Nothing's flying to Melbourne right now. But it is actually up to the state health authorities to determine who gets exempt and who doesn't.
Understood. Okay. Fantastic. I think we've done a pretty good job of going through the majority of the questions. Thank you again. Do you have anything that you'd like to add to finish us off?
I would simply say this, that I probably said it 3 times in the interview, but we're really trying to help people. If you want me to come and if you're helping out with the community, you know, for example, I've posted on Facebook quite a number of Australians that are giving food to various hospitals. We're giving some food to the New York Police Department in certain areas in precincts. If you have a story that you'd like to share with us, we'd like to share it with the community as well.
Okay.
And even though this is a very, very stressful time, you know, we just want to be part of your community, and think of us as somebody can reach out to. We've got a lot of expertise. I mean, I'm a generalist as a Consul-General. It's a terrible pun, but we have, you know, we have our passport and consular team have had years and years and years of experience. They've got great relationships back. If there's a question, they go straight back and get it sorted out.
Yeah, fantastic.
So see us as a resource. Don't see us as the people that's going to sort of get your magic private jet flight back from New York under repatriation. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
And again, do that risk assessment. Be very Australian. I think Australians, we're very self-reliant.
Yep.
We are here to help, but in terms of that risk assessment, really sit down. Every circumstance is different. But if you want to have an individual discussion with our team, absolutely, we're here to do that.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again.
Josh, thank you. It's a great initiative.
No, thank you very much for sitting down.
No, it's fantastic. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. And thank you to everyone that has tuned in. We've had some, you know, we had amazing questions, and we've had continual questions that I hope we've touched on throughout. Just a reminder to everyone that Alastair is interviewing Chantel Markel from Commissa Markel. She's a fantastic immigration lawyer who can answer a lot of the questions that I'm seeing a few in the chat, and I'm not ignoring you, but they're questions about unemployment and benefits and things that would be best answered by an immigration attorney, and she will cover that because she's talked about those before. So be sure to keep an eye out, and as I said, we'll send links about the Consulate's Facebook groups and website this evening. So jump onto the Consulate's Facebook page tomorrow and you'll find a link to that webinar. Tune into that. I've got information on my website, americajosh.com/corona, which has lots of information, and I'm sharing all sorts of resources that I find from reliable teams, including Alastair's team at the Consulate. Just so everyone knows, I also host Friday Night Drinks. As Alastair mentioned, they do theirs as well, but I do a trivia and drinks just to lighten the mood and not talk about quite you know, these are very sensitive topics and it's a stressful time. So trying to connect that community and make sure we're all talking, because I think as much as we want to make sure you're getting advice from the consulate and professionals, it's also important to make sure that we're still talking and we're communicating as much as possible.
Yep.
So thank you again, everyone. We're going to send out a feedback form which allows you to ask questions if you've got any follow-ups that you'd like, including questions that you might want to ask Chantel for Thursday, that can be fed through that feedback form. But thank you again, Alastair, very much. And thanks to everyone at the Consulate for helping out in getting us here today.
Thanks, Josh. Great initiative. Good on you.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone.